Welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be rebuilding these 32mm BING CV carburetors. These carburetors are off of a 1973 BMW R75/5, and this procedure is going to be the same for the 32 as well as the 40mm BING, like Diaphragm CV style carbs. So if your carb looks like this, it's a very good indicator that, this video is going to pretty much apply to your bike. So there's that little number on the side there, that middle number 32, that represents that this is a 32mm carb. So you are going to need a 32mm carb rebuild kit. In this carb rebuild kit, which can be purchased from the BMWpartsguy.com, includes 2 diaphragms. Those are the top diaphragms for under here, as well as float bowl gaskets, the little cover gaskets for the choke under here, as well as a assortment of O-rings. So what I like to do is just kind of set this aside. You'll use there's a kit here for 2 carbs, so just kind of set everything aside. So there you go, one carb rebuild kit, the other carb rebuild kit. So we'll just do one at a time and set all this stuff aside. First thing we're going to do is just get this carb apart. So it doesn't necessarily have to be done in any order here, but let's just take the float bowl off here. These carbs are in pretty good condition. There's a good chance that yours are in much worse condition. But first things first, pop that float bowl off. Get this cork gasket out. These carbs have been sitting for like 25 years. You can see that gasket just fell apart. And we'll set our old stuff off to the side. So I'm just rebuilding it because everything's old and all the rubber O-rings are more than likely dry rotted, just like that cork gasket is kind of just falling apart like that. So we're just going to get everything apart and then kind of take it from there. So let's get this diaphragm top off. Get these off. You don't want to strip out the top there. That will kind of end up giving you a lot of trouble getting those out. You'll be drilling into your carburetor. Let's not do that. So get that off. This one's being kind of a pain. So when a screw like this one is really hard to get off, I'll show you a little trick. So this is called a hand impact. So what a hand impact is, you hit this, and as you hit it, it kind of cams this off to the side, so it's pushing force in and a twisting motion at the same time. So what we're gonna do is put that there. Doesn't need to be hit super hard, but we're just gonna use a little rubber hammer. Give it a little tap like that. And that 9 times out of 10, might have to hit it a little harder. We'll just jar that screw loose. Let's see how that worked there. And it just busted that loose. And you can get that screw out really easily without damaging that screw at all. So with that hand impact, you can see the head of the screw is undamaged, as well as the carb body undamaged. So that's a really handy tool to have while doing this. So let's get the diaphragm off here. One thing we're going to look for is if our diaphragm is torn, and look at that. So that is a huge, I don't know why, let me see here. What side? Oh, it's torn on this side right here. So sometimes if it's torn up here, it could be from, backfires but that is just torn from old age. Probably gas and oil getting up there, deteriorating this. It should be rated for that, but this is just junk. So definitely needed to be rebuilt. Even though the carb's clean, it's just old and worn out. So we'll replace this diaphragm here. There's these 4 screws on the bottom there. Undo these. These are not going to be as tight as the top there, the ones we just did. Undo those. The rubber on this diaphragm is kind of adhered to the metal. You can see it's kind of like pulling off like that. So got that out. This diaphragm, that thing is junk. So we're gonna set that over here with our other junk. Now that we have our diaphragm off, we're gonna go ahead and reinstall this one. So pretty easy. This has this little nubby right there, lines up right there. So you line that up, you can see it. Line that up just like that. Take this really doesn't have any orientation at all. Drop that in there, line up your screw holes. Let's drop some screws in. So snug all those up, and then we'll just set this aside. When we reassemble this, you can see there's another one of those little nubbies there, which is gonna align with that right there. Let's move on to our pilot jet. Pilot jet is right here, just with a flathead screwdriver down into here. Pour that out. There's gonna be an O-ring on this one that is pretty much plastic. We'll also undo our pilot air screw right here. This should have an O-ring on it too that I'm suspecting, again, is pretty much like plastic. If I break, I can't even pick that O-ring off. It's so hard, that's crazy. This carb has sat for quite some time. We'll just set this right here off to the side. And then there's gonna be a little spring in there. So, see right there. So that spring goes over that. We'll just set that aside again. Let's get these floats out. To get the float out, we're gonna use a punch and or any suitable object really, and just punch this pin through. It's gonna go through better this direction. You can see that the pin is smaller on that side and a little larger on that side. So you kind of have to use I don't know if you can see how big that one is on the camera compared to this one, but it's gonna go out that direction. So now getting this pin out, what we're gonna do is use a tiny little punch like that, line it up, and then we'll use a small hammer. I'm just gonna, shouldn't require that much effort, but needle nose pliers, and there we are. So what I was talking about, you can see that one end right there is kind of knurled, so it grabs into the aluminum, and the other end's smooth. So it's easier to pull out this way, so you don't have to pull that knurling through everything. And we'll just set this off to the side. Here's our floats. These floats looking like they're in pretty good condition. One thing you can do is just fill up a little small container with water or something and make sure your floats actually float. Because these look like they're in good condition, but you want to make sure they actually float and they don't just leave your gas on the whole time, you know? So we'll check that later. Here's your needle and seat. This is a common item to be replaced. Put an 8mm wrench on the top and there we are. So this is your main jet. In your main jet, you can see, you want to be able to see just straight through that. You can see this main jet is very clean. This bike was stored properly. That does not need to be blown through, but if yours, you can't see through it, just put your carb clean in there and blow through it, clean it out nice. So you got a 10mm socket, put that on there. Should come off pretty easily. There we are. This has an O-ring on it. That's why we needed to get this one out. And there's also a couple small orifices. So see that O-ring? That's going to be the big O-ring that needs to be replaced. And then we're going to want to clean out that hole. And then there's going to be some other stuff inside of here. this piece right here that has a hole through it, you're gonna wanna make sure is nice and clean. And then you can see that has like a tapered seat, and these seat together like that. So now we're gonna get this choke off. So we'll just loosen up all of these. Then we'll have to loosen up this and pay attention to the orientation of that little indent on here. So that indent goes towards the arm. This off shouldn't be terribly tight. So there's a couple O-rings behind here, and these O-rings need to be replaced, because if these O-rings leak at all, you're gonna have a bad time. It'll leak air past the throttle plate, and your bike's gonna be kind of having a false lean condition. You'll never be able to adjust it right. You'll be throwing bigger jets in with no luck, and you'll have kind of an absurdly sized jet, which is a good indication that your bike's leaking air, popping on deceleration, and you should probably replace all these O-rings. So there's that gasket. We'll set that aside, and then under here, pour our screws out. Pop this through by pushing on that. Let's see. That O-ring right there is what we need to get at to replace. All disassembled. We need to get well, not 100% disassembled, but we need to get this butterfly valve out. So let's get these two screws out. Again, don't strip this out, otherwise you're gonna have a really bad time, which those are in there pretty good, and it actually looks like the previous owner has tried rebuilding that and was unsuccessful, but I think we're going to be successful this time. I always end up working on stuff that other people have touched, and I don't know, it ends up being a big headache, but it's part of the game. So let's get that spring off. Remember that long portion is on the arm, the cam arm here, and the short one is connected through that hole there. Let's use a screwdriver to pop that off. Set that aside. We'll get these two Phillips screws out of the way here. And this spring, this whole unit here is gonna have to come out. This is your idle adjustment. And then when we reassemble this carburetor, we're going to adjust the idle and kind of set the carburetor up just on the bench. Get that out. So with the spring, there's no O-rings or anything on that. There's just a spring, this little collar there. So put that collar down. We'll just set that aside. Get these right here off. And then we need to take the top, that nut off there. 11 millimeter again. Set that aside. Kind of wiggle the cam arm here off. This is for your throttle. There's a little washer. Set that aside. Take this arm off, set that aside. That arm sits in that groove right there. So right there is put underneath in this groove. Set that aside. Now we need to get our butterfly valve off. These two screws, this is going to be a little bit difficult just because the previous owner has very nicely stripped that out for us. So not at all what I really wanted to do, but being that the heads on those bolts were stripped out, I had to drill that out. So had to drill that out. In doing so, I mean, this right here is going to be pretty much impossible to get out. So we'll have to order a new one of these. This is the O-ring that we needed to access. So we had to get this off anyway, because without replacing this O-ring, we would have had major issues. And another thing I noticed was he had kind of some chips right here on his butterfly valve. I don't know what that's from, but that's going to leak air that's not metered by this and cause some issues. So we'll have to replace these two pieces in the carburetor. But other than that, everything came apart pretty smoothly. I was able to get one of those screws out. The other one I had to drill out. So here's just the bare carb body. We can go ahead and remove this screw. This screw is what we're going to use later for synchronizing the carburetors together. But what we're going to end up doing is just with the bare carb body, use our brake clean, our brake clean here, and really just, spray it through every one of these little orifices. You can spray it through there. This is just a bare aluminum housing, so these orifices here, through here, everything. So really just soak this thing down. You can't use too much carb clean, through there. Just make sure you get every little last bit of junk out of here, because if you don't, it's gonna clog something. It'll find its way somewhere where it shouldn't be. So we're just gonna really, really, really thoroughly clean out every last thing in this carburetor. And then when you're done doing that, we'll go through, replace all these O-rings. Make sure you just clean up everything in here. Clean up this piece. I'm gonna clean everything up, and then when I restart this video, next I'll have new pieces and we'll reassemble everything. So I went ahead and ordered some brand new butterfly valve, brand new butterfly plate, 2 screws, and a needle for the needle and seat. So now we are going to start reassembly. So I got my carb body all nice and neatly cleaned up. What I did is just use some carbon choke cleaner, sprayed it through, every single orifice in here, basically just through everything, so there's not any sort of dust or grime or anything that is going to be holding the throttle plate open or end up clogging your pilot jet or anything. So another thing I did is all the jets here, make sure they were actually pretty clean, but it's kind of hard to see through it, but cleaned out all those little orifices. This is your pilot jet, so there's a little tiny hole going through it. You can barely see it there. There you go. Cleaned out that one. Cleaned out all of these 3 right here. This one here. Your main jet, make sure your main jet's nice and clean. Your float, so I just got this is what I was talking about earlier. Take your float and make sure it actually floats. Sometimes these floats will like deteriorate internally or kind of fall apart, and they won't float. It'll just sink right to the bottom. So when that happens, when your float is in here, it won't float in the gas, and it'll just leave your needle open all the time, causing gas to just fill up your float bowl, and then your gas is just going to be leaking on your foot the entire time you're driving, if not cause a fire or something. So anyway, so we got everything all cleaned up and ready to be reassembled. So first thing we're going to do is replace all the O-rings. We got that has an O-ring on it, the air screw has an O-ring on it, the pilot jet has an O-ring on it, as well as the choke unit there. And then our butterfly valve rod had an O-ring on it, but the new one came with an O-ring. So one of the O-rings we will not be using. But we have this O-ring that came in the rebuild kit, purchased from the BMWguy.com. And also, if this is just kind of too much for you guys to tackle, and you want it, it's a little bit of a challenge, and you want to make sure that your carburetors are rebuilt perfect and correctly with new parts, and if you have maybe trouble identifying what part is going to be new or bad, feel free to message me. My email will be in the description, and you could send your carburetors to me. I could rebuild them and send them back in probably a couple day turnaround. So rebuilding your carburetors is something that's going to need to be done Geez. It's something that's going to need to be done. If you ever let your bike sit for a long period of time, or you start experiencing a big runnability issue, like these O-rings are just like crumbling apart. So this bike would not have ran. All these O-rings would have leaked. So, but anyway, what I'm doing is just undoing them all. I'm using a razor blade because I can't get them off with a pick tool because they're so hard, and I mean they just break apart like that. So I mean these O-rings can literally just be, if you can look at that, just like they can like snap these O-rings in 2 pieces. So where these ones are nice and squishy rubber like they're supposed to be. So we'll just go ahead and start fitting our new O-rings on. One goes there. The 2 little ones are going to go on the Pilot air screw, and then the Pilot jet. These ones can kind of be a pain. You kind of have to stretch it over the head there, just like that. We'll put this one on. Also, if you guys haven't already, please click the join button. It's right next to the subscribe button. By clicking the join button, it only costs $4.99 a month, and that's going to get you 24/7 support on whatever questions you may have with your bike. I get hundreds of emails and Facebook messages that are basically just asking me for little help, or how much oil does my bike take. I do answer some of them, but with a huge overwhelming amount of emails I get, I can't answer them all. Please consider clicking that join button. It really helps me out, and hopefully it will help you out as well. So now we will reassemble our carburetor here. It doesn't need to be necessarily reassembled in any order, but if you just follow along, you should have no problems. So Pilot air screw, the spring goes on that, and it's going to go down in this hole here. And then we're going to kind of set this up for like a baseline. We will tighten this all the way down until the screw seats. So you can see right there, it seats at the bottom. We're not tightening it, it just comes to like a harsh stop. And we're going to back this out 1.5 turns. So the reason I'm doing that is just kind of setting it up for like a baseline setting. The next piece we'll put in is the main jet and everything. So there's this brass piece, which goes over this piece. And then this piece has like a conical seat, which will seat down in there like that. So first things first, this gets dropped down in there with those holes up, all cleaned out. Then this gets dropped down in this orientation. They're going to kind of, maybe kind of use a pick tool to kind of situate everything around through the carb body. You should see the hood. The hood of that piece right there sticks through. So you can see it down in there, all nice. And then this piece goes in next. And then we use a 10mm wrench, socket, whatever, and we'll just tighten this down in there just until it seats. So once it seats, you don't need to tighten it, but just give it a little bit of a snug. Put our main jet in next. You're going to want to make sure that's nice and cleaned out. There's a washer. So you put the washer down, and then the main jet. The main jet is a 8mm. So just like we did before, tighten that up and just not super tight, but just snug. Put our pilot jet in. Our pilot jet goes down here. This is a very, very, very small hole. You can see it through there, and all these holes, make sure those are all cleaned out. Drop that down in there. Use a flathead screwdriver. And this, we're just gonna tighten it down until it stops. Boom, stops right there. And then we will just do the whole bottom here. So I got this brand new needle. And then the seat is in there. The seat in there is not replaceable, but you want to make sure that's nice and clean, spray it out good. So this will just drop down in there. There's two sizes of these. Some are going to be a metal tip. Others are going to be like a rubber tip. This one takes a metal tip. They're not interchangeable. I wish they were. I personally think the rubber tip is better, a little bit better sealing. And then there's this pin that goes through. So you need to identify, you can kind of look in here to see which one has the scratches on it from that knurling. So it goes through this way. So we're gonna put our floats down and then get our needle through. Also, one more thing, on our floats here, there's this tang right here, this tang, and that's how you set your float height. You can see that there. So to set your float height, you can use a screwdriver and kind of do one of these and bend that tang out to set your float height. So your float height should be level with the body of the carburetor. So we're gonna set that in there and then use a suitable object and just kind of tap this pin through. So our floats should float nicely. And then the float height that I was talking about, it's gonna be hard to pick up on camera, but you can see your needle right in there moving up and down. So right where it stops. So this float height, you can see right there is where it seats. So this float height is off severely. So the float height, to adjust this, right where it stops right there, we want the float to be level with the car body. So right about like that. But so what we're gonna end up doing is just screwdriver, and you just wanna bend this tang up, you know, just barely. So I just used a screwdriver and bent that tang a little bit so that when it seats like that, the float is level, like flush with the car body across. So before it was like down here. So that means when the gas level gets up, the gas level is constantly gonna be very low. So you want it to shut off level with the car body. So and make sure it has good movement like that. So it won't ever get hung up, you know? It's nice. And then under here, we're all good. So we're gonna throw our brand new cork gasket in. Then we can just use a flathead screwdriver and kind of seat that cork gasket around the carburetor in that groove. So just work your way around. Take our float ball, all cleaned out. That is gonna go on there like that. And then slide that over. Done. So that bottom portion of the carburetor is done. So now, the next thing we'll do is just throw our slide in. So like I said before, there's this little nub on the diaphragm, which lines up with a little nub on the car body. So slide this down in here. The needle is going to go into the hole there. Make sure that that little nub is aligned with the diaphragm and everything's nice. You don't want this to be pinched or anything because your bike won't run. It'll be very obvious immediately. And then this slides down that way. With these two for your carb adjustment are going to be, you know, towards this side of your carburetor. So I'm gonna slide that down and then make sure kind of as I'm seating this, you know, make sure I'm not pinching, make sure it's nice and aligned up all the way around. There you go. You can see how nice that just laid down like that. So, and then looking through here, that should be nice and straight. That slide shouldn't be cocked or anything. All right, so now we will install the top of our carburetor with these 4 screws and a flathead screwdriver. And then the next part we'll work on is getting together this side of the carburetor. So we got a new O-ring on there. We got this part right here. So this is going to slide on this way. And if you remember from before, there's this little nub or little indexing mark on the choke right there. Can you see that on the camera? So that indexing mark is going to point this way. So you can see the indexing mark on here, indexing mark on there, so it all lines up, and that will go through like that. And the O-ring is going to kind of snap through there, just like that. We got a new gasket for that. So I got the screws in there just to kind of line everything up and hold it all down. So boom, just like that. They are labeled L and R. If you can see there, that's an L, so we're doing the left carburetor right now. And then that seats down. And then with a flathead screwdriver, just like we did before, we're going to tighten this up. And these do not need to be reefed down. Don't get your impact out or do anything weird. You know, just seat these down. You're more than likely the carburetors will need to be rebuilt again if you take a year or 2 off from riding. So let's not mess this up for the next guy. So we'll just tighten all these up. Make sure it's all seated and nothing's hanging up. If that O-ring starts to, any of the O-rings that we've installed start to like roll over or get pinched, you should be able to feel that, and that isn't going to be good. So tighten up these, just tight enough for it to seal, not tight enough for it to never come off again. And then we're going to put this piece down. So this piece goes like that. And this should have a good freedom of movement, not like grinding, but nice and smooth actuation. And then a washer, and then our nut. And then we're going to use a 11 millimeter. Don't rip these down, because you're going to have a bad time if you have to ever remove it again. Another thing that you can do if you start torquing this over is with this arm. I'm just using this little stop built into the carburetor. If you torque it too tight, you can end up snapping that stop off, and then you're kind of out of luck. So we got our choke is all together. We might as well tackle our butterfly next. So our butterfly valve, this is the new rod, is going to go through this hole. And then there's that O-ring. So then that O-ring, we're going to have to just push that through like that. You can kind of see this should just go through real nice. There we are. Should be nice and free rotating. And you can see those, the holes here are tapered in. So we're going to want those, this looking at us. And then our new butterfly plate has a little indexing mark right there. That's going to be facing up. So we'll rotate our valve down, put this in this way, and this is a pretty precise fitment. So don't force that, don't scratch it up, don't ding it up, don't dent it. So now our butterfly valve is in there. That indexing mark should be pointing straight up. It is possible to have that a little cocked, and if that's a little cocked, that butterfly valve is not a perfect circle. It's like more of an oblong type thing. So you can potentially put it in slightly crooked, which is going to kind of artificially hold your throttle plate open, and air is going to leak past, and it'll be a huge pain to tune. So I just tuned a carburetor the other day where the owner replaced these and had it cocked a little bit, and I ended up having to go to his house to fix it for him. So when you have this on, you should be able to move it with your hand. I guess you can see right now it is kind of cocked, and you can see that it's not sealing up top there, you know? So you can kind of spin it around with your hand, make sure it hold kind of pressure this way, and move that butterfly valve around until it seats perfectly. That indexing mark should be perfectly straight up and down, so that's a good indicator. So right there, nice and sealed up all around. Then tighten these screws up, and as we learned from before, these screws do not need to be super tight. Yes, if they're left loose, they can vibrate loose and fall into your motor, which would probably end in a catastrophic failure. But at the same time, they don't need to be reefed down. We don't need to Loctite these, but just snug them up. They're not going to come loose. So now, butterfly valve is installed, sealed up all around, indexing mark facing upward, and looking good. So then, the next thing we're going to be doing is installing this piece right here. So this piece is going to go, there's this kind of groove here. So it goes just like that. So it'll be kind of, I don't know, this groove right there is gonna go into the groove on that butterfly valve, just like that. So that's gonna sit just there. And then after that, we have our 2 screws here with washers that hold that down. So we'll go ahead and install those. And this will all only go together one way correctly. Yes, you can fit this in, flipped around, but it won't work. You know, nothing else will line up. So you do have to use a little common sense putting it together. You know, if you have to force something to get around something, it's probably incorrect. We can put our idle screw through with the spring, and then also that little hat there, so that seats on that spring, goes through like that. Flathead, just get this started, and we'll kind of set our idle baseline here in a second. So just get that started. You can see it's starting to come out here, and that's good for now. So now we're going to install these 2 pieces here. So how to install these, you have this tang. That's where that idle screw that we just installed is going to push against to adjust your idle. So this piece with the tang facing down goes over our butterfly valve. And then this piece next, which has the hole in it for the spring, so that hole is going to be facing down, goes like that, and it should kind of align, align for the throttle cable there. And then our washer and our 11mm nut. So install this. Jeez. And then with an 11mm wrench, tighten that up. So throttle plate opens up, nice and square, should be flat like that. This is our stop up here, so that right here, this little tang here is gonna stop on that stop. And then on the bottom here, it's seating the butterfly valve, and then we will adjust our idle screw here. So if a camera will pick it up, what I like to do is just hold my finger, hold pressure down so that butterfly is seating in the carb body, and we're gonna tighten this screw in right up until it seats onto this piece right here. So right when it seats, we're just gonna go one turn beyond that, and that's gonna kind of just give us like a bench setting. So if you can see in there, like right there, there's a gap there, so we're gonna tighten it and right until it seats, and you should feel it on this finger, like, so like right there, it's like just seating. So we're just gonna go one turn beyond that, just to kind of set our carbs up baseline. So we know that both idle screws are one turn in from seated, which is in return opening up this butterfly ever so slightly. And that our idle air screw right here is 1.5 turns out from fully seated. So we have a real general idea that both of our carbs are relatively synchronized on the bench before we install it onto the motor. So then we're going to install our spring with this long side here onto this arm. This can kind of be a pain, not too bad, but I have to finagle some things around. That goes through like that, and then you stretch it out and then hook it through that hole right there. So it's hooked. So then, you know, our choke here operates nice and smoothly. Our butterfly valve is nice and smooth, springs back nice. Brand new diaphragms, everything under here is all good. So that is one completely rebuilt, ready to go carburetor, guaranteed to perform. Thank you very much for watching. And if you stuck with me through this whole video, or this video helped you out in any way, please consider subscribing. That really helps me out. Also, please click the join button. Again, yeah, thank you very much. And as always, have a safe ride.